So it's the end of 2023, and I've been trying to make this video for too long, and I figured it's a good time to reflect on what I learned this year and to put the sum of my learnings this year. So for those of you that know me, like this year I separated from my marriage, and it was very painful, and I had to do a lot of self work to understand where that pain was coming from, uh, and how to be a better person out of it so that I could move on with my life and not carry that pain with me. And so the big lesson I learned was that it wasn't my ex's fault that she behaved the way that she did, that I couldn't live with her for that reason. And it wasn't only her fault, it was also my fault for having my own generational trauma, which is the topic of this video. Basically, what happens is that until you heal that pain inside yourself, you continue to behave in a way that hurts others because you need other people to feel better about yourself. And my ex and I were both in places in our life where neither of us were healed. And so we were hurting each other, and that's why the marriage failed. And the reason that we weren't healed was not perhaps for any particular traumatic event that happened in our own lives. I'm sure we had trauma in our own lives, but what was really helpful for me was to understand which behaviors came from generational trauma. On my end, I saw how my mother's behavior that impacted me in a hurtful way, I love you, Mom, came from her mom. And from her mom came like her life. Maybe it even came from her parents, but she had a very traumatic life. She had to move many times and fled her country. There was war involved, and this habitat impermanence left her anxious and critical because she needed her family to excel. And the way she improved her family's capacity to excel was to show them a better way of excelling, which was like criticism. I think Asian cultures are normally very critical, but the point is that I became critical, and when I was critical, I was hurting my ex. And they say criticism is one of the four horsemen of marriage, and I didn't understand that. I didn't read that book before my marriage ended. I read it after the marriage ended. So here I am doing the learning after the fact and making a video about it. And then my ex too also had her behavior. She would get very insulting in an argument and disrespectful, and that's why our marriage stopped. Right? Was I was criticizing her and she didn't feel safe, and she was insulting me and disrespecting me, and I didn't feel like I wanted to be in that relationship either. So instead of holding my ex accountable for her poor behavior, I had to forgive her for it, and it wasn't easy. I had many, the better part of the year in resentment of my ex, and I didn't want to feel that way. So what I did was I learned to love her for who she is, which is what I promised to do at the beginning of our marriage. And in order to forgive her for her, toxic behavior, I had to understand that it wasn't her fault that she behaved that way. And the way I did that was I learned that she also had generational trauma, that she inherited from her mom. And her mom probably inherited from her grandfather, who lived through World War II before he started a family, and probably carried all of that World War II trauma with him when he started his family. And he had negative behaviors that impacted his family. And so his family carried his pain because he couldn't process his pain himself. He did the next best thing, right? Which was to start a family and be so busy that you didn't think about that pain anymore. But that doesn't really work because you're still hurting. And if you're not whole enough that you can raise other people up, you're probably just going to hurt them too, so that they feel the same way you do, which is very common in insecure or unhealed selves when they interact with others, which is the whole point, is that when you understand what impact generational trauma has had on yourself, you can understand your behavior, and then you can fix it by understanding the pain, feeling that pain, understanding where it comes from, and then forgiving yourself and everyone else right down like before you for what it is that you do. And then you can fix that behavior by slowing down, understanding what triggers it when you're in a stressful situation and you're in a fight or flight situation, and you get this trauma response that you learned from your parents. It's not your fault that you learned it that way, but it's what your parents did to you, and they only did it because that's what their parents did to them, and they only did it because some traumatic event happened in the world that led them to that trauma response. And so when you can slow it down and you understand what it is that you're doing when you do it, you can change that behavior because you're no longer instinctively acting in a fight or flight response when it's not necessary. Just because something breaks when it drops doesn't mean you're going into fight or flight, but you might give the fight or flight response because that's how you process stress. So the idea is that you're going to learn what that behaviors are and then change them so that you're no longer hurting other people. And it's not just your children that you end up hurting with this. It's typically your children because you have a deeper connection with your children where you spend more time with them. But in all likelihood, you are engaging and projecting your pain on everybody in your life. So that's why it's so important to heal. And that's why it's so important to learn generational trauma generational trauma's impact on who you are. And so I hope that this video helped you reflect and teach you a little bit about why you are the way you are, or give you the tools at any rate to understand better why you are the way you are so that you can be a better person and we can stop hurting each other. Happy New Year.